And when we have clutter, the clutter prevents us from manifesting that purpose. We get bogged down in.
Hey, you're listening to the Follower of One podcast. We want our faith to matter full time, whatever we're doing, but especially at work. Here's today's podcast. Hey everyone, it's Mike Henry Sr. with Follower of One. Thanks for joining me again today on the Follower of One podcast. Today, I'd like you to meet my guest. It's Barbara Hemphill, and she's got a website, barbarahemphill.com. I want to let her tell you about herself and everything else that's going on. Barbara, would you tell everyone hi?
Oh, absolutely. And Mike, thank you so much for inviting me for this conversation. I was so excited to meet you through Follower of One and to find out about your ministry, and anything that I can do to promote that is something that brings me great joy. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what I do and why it's important to me.
Tell me about your business and what you do.
Well, in 1978, my first husband and I moved to New York City from India, where we had lived for almost 5 years, as we were members of an organization called Church World Service that worked with the U.S. government to distribute foodstuffs, milk and cheese and things like that. We did that for almost 5 years. And while we were there, we adopted 3 orphan children. They were ages 2, 3, and 4. And we came back to New York City, and my husband was working for a nonprofit and didn't get enough money to be able to pay for living expenses in New York City. So I needed to bring money into the family, but one of our adopted children had special needs. So I wanted to make my children first, and I had a special need to be able to take care of her. So I decided the best way to do it was to have my own business. And the way to do that would be to find a problem in the world that I could solve that people would pay me for. So in order to do that, I just sat on the playground with my children and I just listened. I listened to what people were talking about. One of the things I considered was a household repair shop, because I grew up on a farm in Nebraska and I used to follow my daddy around. So I was pretty handy at doing little small repairs. But then I learned that in New York, you had to be a member of the union. So it's like, okay, well, I can't do that. So I continued to listen, and I heard these conversations about disorganization, about clutter, about we had to file an extension on our income taxes because I couldn't find the receipts, or I'm arguing with my children about the clutter in their room, or my husband brings his stuff home from work and dumps it on the kitchen counter, and then I'm trying to cook and I've got all this stuff, and I'm always late going places. And I thought about it, I thought, they didn't have my mother, because I'm not a naturally organized person. I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 40s. And I was trained as a musician, so I'm right-brained. I love to start things. I have trouble finishing them. I love the big picture, but I hate details. And so I am not a naturally organized person, but I was so blessed because my mother was the assistant to the president and owner of a bank for 46 years. And so in our household, it wasn't always neat. There's a big difference between being organized and being neat. It wasn't always neat. But if the pastor called and said he was coming, it'd only take a few minutes to get everything put away. And we didn't stuff it in the closet or under the bed. There was a place for everything.
Everything had a place,
Well, everything didn't always have a place, but when it needed to, there was a place for it to go. And I think that's one of the issues, is people think that being organized means you have to be a neat freak. And I'm living proof that that is not true. So at any rate, and my dad was a farmer. So if you're a farmer, you have to have systems. I grew up in my company. We use the term system, and we use it as an acronym: saving you space, time, energy, and money. Because every time you have to do something repeatedly, let's take income taxes. Okay. We know we have to pay taxes every single year. So it does not make sense that we go through some kind of angst every year, because if we put a system in place, while we might not like doing it, we would at least know what to do and in what order. So I was all about systems. Well, I put an ad I took $7 out of the grocery money, which was a big deal because I used to walk 20 blocks because I didn't have 50 cents for the bus. And the ad said, disorganized, I organize closets, files, kitchens, you name it, called Barbara Hemphill. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, I had a rough start because I got 3 crank calls from guys trying to pick me up. And then the 4th call was from a 55-year-old widow whose husband was an attorney. He had died very suddenly and had left piles of paper everywhere in their home and then also in his office. It was a solo practitioner. She did not know that she was my first client, and I did not tell her. I'll never forget walking in and looking at the piles and thinking, what in the world have I done? But then I thought, well, I'm just going to do what I know to do. So I started sorting and saying, okay, I need to talk to the lawyer about this and the stockbroker about this and the insurance agent about this. And that's how I start. And to promote the business, I would speak at PTAs, garden clubs, church groups, anybody that would listen. I didn't even have a business card because I couldn't afford it at that point, but I'd go give a speech and say, if anybody wants help, why, I'm available. And I charged $10 an hour and lived in horror that someone would ask me what made me think I was worth $10 an hour. And then I learned very quickly that the question that people would ask me was, well, I learned that we could do closets, cupboards, kitchens, garages, but what was the hardest for people was paper. And people would ask me the question of how long do you keep? And in those days, it was bank statements because we used to get our canceled checks wrapped up in our bank statement in those big, thick envelopes, and people would put them in boxes. And they would be under the bed and in the garage, and because everybody thought they ought to keep them because after all, they have numbers on them and the IRS might want them, which is not really true, but that's what people thought. But then they would ask me how long to keep those and how long to keep expired insurance policies or real estate records or medical records. And I didn't know the answer, but I thought, well, there must be a book in the library on that. So I went to the library, and much to my amazement, there wasn't one. And I thought, this is truly amazing because it doesn't make any difference if you earn $18,000 a year or $800,000 a year, you still need to know the answers to that question. So in 1988, I wrote a book called Taming the Paper Tiger, which was about every single piece of paper that comes into the household, everything from financial records and tax records to recipes and children's artwork and memorabilia and junk mail and all those things. And it was designed, you could read it from cover to cover. And if you did, there was a system for exactly how you organize paper. That book still exists today. Today it's called Organizing Paper at Home, What to Toss and How to Find the Rest. And that book became a bestseller. And that gave me the title that I was known for many years as the Paper Tiger Lady. And for about 20 years, I had a wardrobe that was all jungle paraphernalia kinds of stuff. And one time I was on an airplane and a man touched me on the shoulder and he looked at me, he says, "Are you the Paper Tiger Lady?" And I said, "Yes, how did you know?" And he said, "Well, I heard your voice. And there was also some software called the Paper Tiger that was named after me. And I was on it in video." So he had heard my voice and he saw my suitcase, which was tiger striped. So that became, my name then. And then we moved into more digital. And it was like, I didn't want people to think that I was old fashioned, that I didn't know how to handle digital. So we renamed the company Productive Environment Institute. And we defined productive environment as an intentional setting in which everyone can accomplish their work and enjoy their lives. And I went into businesses because I would have a client as a personal client, and then she'd say, "Could you come to the office with me?" And my first answer was, "Well, I don't know. I've never organized an office, but I'll go. And if I can do it, you can pay me. And if I don't, you don't owe me anything." Well, I soon learned that organizing is organizing. I mean, a filing system is a filing system. It doesn't matter whether it's personal papers or business papers. And a supply closet in an office is no different than a closet, and warehouses are just like storage closets. And so it's like, oh, the principles are absolutely the same. So productive environment was invented. And in 1988, back when I was still using Paper Tiger, I started training people to be certified in the way that I did it. They were originally called Paper Tiger Authorized Consultants. And then when we moved to Productive Environment, now they're called Certified Productive Environment Specialists. And these are people who have paid for training. The company Productive Environment is run by one of the women that I trained, who now owns and runs the company. My goal when I set up the company was that I wanted it to exist when I died. So if I drop dead tomorrow, the company will continue to exist. In the meantime, I'm still actively involved as much as I want to be. And
very good.
We have this certification program. And during COVID, it was a blessing because there were so many people trying to set up offices, and we do our work virtually. So we were able to help people set up their offices at home and being able to do it virtually. So it was a huge, huge blessing. So that's kind of a short synopsis of 46 years. I mean, if you've heard of, there's a woman named Marie Kondo who wrote a book called The Magic of Tidying Up, which became a bestseller. She had a TV show. Basically, I was Marie Kondo 46 years ago.
Very cool. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now you currently on your website, you also have several other books that you've written. Tell us about a couple of the other books.
Well, one of the books that was really key in moving from Paper Tiger Institute to Productive Environment was one called Less Clutter, More Life. And it's a beautiful, you can see it has gorgeous photographs, and it's kind of like an art book. And a friend of mine did the photographs in it. And the premise of it is that physical and digital clutter is a symptom of emotional and spiritual clutter. And that's one of the things that I introduced into this industry. The industry's existed. I was actually one of the founders of the National Association, and there are thousands of organizers now. When actually one of the things I should have said was I was in New York City for a year, and then we moved to Washington, D.C., and I went to the Small Business Administration to ask them to help me start this organizing business, and they laughed me out of the room and said, this is not a viable business. Nobody's going to pay for organizing closets, cupboards, and kitchens. And I think I saw now it's like an $18 billion industry. So, but I was the first to link physical and digital clutter to emotion and spiritual clutter. And that's really the key. Paper is hard, not because it's paper, but because of what it represents. It represents our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our expectations, and making those decisions is difficult. My business has been based on, my registered trademark is Clutter is postponed decisions. I learned that from clothes closets. The clothes closet fills up because you haven't decided whether you're going to lose the 10 pounds to get into that favorite pair of pants again, or what to do with the exercise equipment that you certainly need to use. And it looked good on Home Shopping Network, but it hasn't been out for a while. And then a really big issue, it's a cultural issue now, are the things we get from people that we love who die and leave things behind. And then it's like, oh, what do I do with this? It's not really my style, but I don't want to be disrespectful. And so tying it in with that. In fact, one time I was autographing Taming the Paper Tiger at Barnes & Noble in New York City. And I made the comment that whenever I worked with a client who had difficulty letting go of things, I found that if I ask enough questions, that I would discover that there had been a severe emotional loss in their life. And when I was done, a young man in his 20s came up and he said, my apartment, he said, I live in a small studio apartment. It's filled with paper. I haven't had anybody in it for months. And he said, I come home from work at night and I say, okay, tonight's the night I'm going to clean up this paper. And he said, I pick up the paper and I literally become physically paralyzed. And he said, there are some nights when I sort on my bed because it's a big flat space. And he said, I just push the papers aside and I literally crawl into bed with my paper. And he looked at me teary-eyed and said, my mother died when I was 6. Are you telling me that I have to deal with the grief of losing my mother before I can organize my paper? My answer was, I'm not a mental health professional. I can't answer that, but I can tell you what I have seen from experience over and over. if you will find someone you trust, most likely not a family member,
Mm-hmm.
who can help you decide what you need and what you want to keep, not what you think, not what somebody else thinks or whatever, but what's important to you. If you find that person, you will be able to solve your paper problem. And in my experience, it will help with other emotions in your life as well.
Yeah.
Well, I was speaking to a group of executive women at a major university, and a woman walked up to me and she said, "Well, you just saved my marriage." I said, "Wow, that's a pretty dramatic statement. Would you mind elaborating?" And she said, "I came to this conference with the intention of going home and telling my husband, to whom I've been married for 13 years, that I was leaving because he's a pack rat and I have allergies and I can't keep the house clean because of all of his stuff." And then she stopped and she said, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "I never understood until I heard you that it wasn't that he wouldn't get rid of it, but that he couldn't get rid of it. His mother died when he was 7. So I said, "May I make a suggestion?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Go home and say something to the effect of, 'I never understood before how important all this is to you. Let's figure out how we can keep it and still live together.'" And I followed up with them for about 8 months, and it was a dramatic improvement. I mean, it's not magic. It took 13 years to get it that way, so you don't undo it in 8 months. But they
Exactly.
made some major changes, because what happens always, and we see this over and over, and God has a sense of humor, because in most marriages, the couples have an opposite way of looking at things.
Yeah.
It's certainly true in my marriage. In fact, when I got married to my second husband, he was a retired colonel, so I figured he'd be neat and organized. Well, I was in for a shock, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be the death of my business. I can't organize my own house." And then I thought, he's not my client. He doesn't want me. And I realized that this is his house as well as mine. So when
Yep.
you come to our house, it's very easy to see whose part of the house is whose. And so it really, the more someone tells you you don't need this, the more you hang on to it. And so when someone feels heard, then her husband began to say, "Well, I don't really need that collection anymore. We could take a photograph of it." And another thing, in Less Clutter, More Life, my favorite page is page 14. It says, "What stops us?" It shows that big boulder.
Yeah.
What stops us? I never have enough time. I have too much to do. I have better things to do. Organizing is boring. It's too difficult. It never lasts. It's never good enough. I didn't create it. I have no idea what's there. I'm easily distracted and go off on tangents. I get stuck in the memories of the past. It's too emotionally draining. And this is a big one. I want to be responsible and respectful of things I've been given. That's a huge one. I have to take care of other people and other things in my life first. It's hard to admit I have an issue. And last is, I'm afraid to let something go. I might want it back again.
Yeah.
So dealing with that side. And then, so for many years, I dealt with the emotional side. I didn't call it spiritual, but then I began to realize the real deep reason is spiritual, because God created us all for a specific purpose. And when we have clutter, the clutter prevents us from manifesting that purpose. We get bogged down in things that don't really matter. So I have a 5-step process we use called the productive environment process, and it starts with state your vision. And a lot of people don't have a vision. A lot of people, especially, I have a program now called Vision Accelerator, and it works with people who either have a vision that they're having difficulty executing, or they don't have one. I just got a call this week from someone who said, "Does your program work if you don't have a vision?" And I said, "Absolutely. In fact, that's the very best. I mean, if somebody doesn't have one." And then she said, "I'm not a Christian and I'm not a believer. Does it still work?" Which, of course, as you can relate to, makes me very happy. And my answer is, yes, it still does. You need to know that I manage my business based on biblical principles. So if you are offended by biblical principles, then we're probably not a good match. But as long as you recognize that I will be using biblical principles, but you don't have to believe them, then we can work together. And so
Well,
she's
and
become a new client.
very cool. In fact, I had another business owner earlier today on another Zoom call that said almost the exact same thing when speaking to someone who had approached them about doing business with them. This is a business coach. And, the faith question came up. And so I think that's a really great way of presenting it, helping other people understand your perspective and how you approach things, and then letting them make an informed choice, right?
Well, and that's what the Bible teaches us. It's not our responsibility to convince somebody else to believe.
Correct.
It's just our responsibility to live what we believe and to share it. And then what they do with it is up to the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. Well, and I wanted to ask you about you actually wrote a book, and it's in Kindle version on your website, things like that, Walking with Barbara. Tell us about that book.
Yeah, it's Walking with Barbara, 30 Emails from God. It's actually in hardback, paperback, Kindle, audio.
Okay.
It's for any form that you want on Amazon. And it came about because one of my businesses, Perry Marshall, did a challenge that we were to write an email a day for 30 days without planning it ahead. It was the purpose of it was to teach us to be better communicators. So I took on the challenge. I immediately said I was only going to write 6 days a week because even God rested on the seventh. So I had written 28 of those emails. And on the 29th day, I went horseback riding and I had an accident. I fell and I broke my collarbone. So my business partner, Andrea Anderson, who runs Productive Environment Institute, wrote the 29th email and said, well, I guess, and the book was just stories. I mean, when I sent it out, I said, I'm going to be writing every day. I have no idea what it's going to be about. I said, it might be personal, it might be business, it might be a rant, it might be tips. I have no idea. But if you want to come along for the ride, sign up. So several people signed up. And so then Andrea wrote to them on that 29th day and said, well, I guess Barbara needed some more stories. So you're going to have to wait for the 30th one. So my collarbone healed and everything. And it was just prior to my 75th birthday that this started. And I had a goal of writing a book for my 75th birthday. And I had some ideas and I was getting ready to do it. Well, then this accident came and then I ended up with a frozen shoulder and I couldn't really type and I was in a lot of pain. And so it's like, well, I guess the 75th birthday book is not going to happen. Well, on my 75th birthday, Andrea and my Productive Environment Institute team got on a Zoom call to wish me a happy birthday. And they said, we just wanted you to know that you did write a book. And they took the 28 emails that I had written, illustrated them, and put that into an ebook.
Oh, cool.
And I thought it was the most creative, loving, amazing book. Well, then I added the 30th email, and then I have partnered with a publishing company called Spirit Media, spiritmedia.us, not .com. And it is specifically designed to take the gospel to the world through publishing. And so the founder of that, of Spirit Media, offered to publish my book into a book form. So that's Walking with Barbara, 30 Emails from God. And we did it with a project that we call Generosity. I have begun a project in India called Shepherd's House Ministry. I met this man named Canary through LinkedIn. I have on my last line in my profile on LinkedIn, it says, as a follower of Jesus, I pray that other people will feel his love, whether I ever mention his name. So as you can imagine, I get a lot of crank calls and things like that. But one man named Canary reached out to me and I felt in my heart that he was for real. And he said, I feel called to be a pastor, but I don't have any training. And so I began to explore a little bit. He didn't tell me for, I don't know, a few weeks that actually he, his wife, and his 3 sons were literally starving. They were living in the woods and they were eating off the land and digging up roots and things like that. So my husband and I started sending money for them to buy food and clothes, and we got the boys in school. Then COVID came, so that kind of closed that down. But long story short, we did end up getting some land, which is a whole miracle
Hmm.
story in and of itself for a Christian to get land in a Hindu country.
Hmm.
We built a road there. We dug a bore well. It was the only well like that for miles
Wow.
around. And so the Hindus in the area would come, and he was able to witness to them. We shipped Bibles to them, and they were just doing fantastic things. So we started
Very cool.
building the Shepherd's House, which is a 3-story building, which will be their home, and also a ministry center and an entrepreneurial center. We have enough land there that they'll be able to
Wow.
grow things and teach things. So we're in the process of building that. It's kind of on hold right at the moment because there's civil war going on in that part of the country, and they're
Hmm.
actually hiding in the woods to keep away from the bombs and the shelling. But hopefully that God will end that soon and we'll be able to go back. So I ended up giving this book away in exchange for a donation to Shepherd's House. So that's
Oh,
that.
very
In the
cool.
meantime, Cannery wrote his life story by typing it on his phone, not dictating it,
Wow.
but typing it. And Spirit Media has published it also. It's called A
Very
Shepherd's
cool.
Story, and it's just the most beautiful, amazing story. So God is working in so many ways through all of this, and everything is to his glory. So
Very cool. And you can find out more about this and connect with Barbara at barbarahemphill.com. And we will have links to her books or to her social media profiles and things like that as well in the show notes. I'm pointing down if you're watching the video, because typically that's underneath the video, but it could be anywhere on the page where you're listening to this. Barbara, I wanted to ask you one more question before we wrap up. I could listen to you talking about some of this stuff for a while, but now you also joined Follower of One because you and I had spoken and took the marketplace mission trip. And so I was just kind of curious now, having done all these different things, and we really have only kind of touched the surface of that in the business world. But what did you think about, the marketplace mission trip and the environment that we create for that 2-week activity?
well, I told you my company's name is Productive Environment, and I
Uh-huh.
think that Follower of One is a way that you can create a productive environment in your workplace to the glory of God. I love it. As I don't know who said it first, but it's certainly true that the largest mission field we have these days is the workplace, because fewer
Yeah.
and fewer people are going to church, but virtually everybody has to go to work. So
Yep.
if there's a place to witness, that's where it is. And Mike, I have to admit that when I started my business 46 years ago, I would sit in the car. At that point, I would go into people's homes and I would sit in the car and I would pray that they would feel my love whether I ever mentioned his name.
Mhm.
And I didn't in the beginning mention his name because I was so afraid of offending someone. I had clients who
Mhm.
were Jewish and Muslim and non-believers, and I just didn't, I was a new business owner trying to make
Mhm.
money. And so I didn't want
Right.
to risk offending anybody. I've now come absolutely full circle, and I feel like the most important thing I can do at some time during the exchange is to share the love of Jesus, and most of all, to be able to ask them where they are in their spiritual life. And I think Follower of One has wonderful tools to help people learn how to do that, because most churches don't teach people how to do that, and it's very scary. You're afraid you're going to do it wrong, or you're afraid you're not going to have the answer. They're going to ask you questions that you don't know the answers to. And through Follower of One, you find out you don't have to know all the answers. All you really have to do is love people. And you can do that by listening. And then you can do it by sharing your story. You're not telling them what they need to do. You're just telling them what works for you. And my biggest, my license plate says Hope Fool. And when people ask me why, I say because I'm a fool for Jesus. And HOPE stands for Help Others Pursue Entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for over 40 years.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this, and I'm just grateful for the stories that you shared. It's really cool.
Thank you, Mike. And I just want to invite the listeners that
That's
if
right.
you are looking for some encouragement in what you're doing, maybe you have a vision that you're not sure how to execute, or it's not going the way it
Yes.
is, or maybe you don't have a vision and you wish you did, or you're in some kind of transition. I have a program that I've been doing it now just for a couple of years, and it's called laser coaching, and it's it's 15-minute calls. I think when people want to make life changes, they often think this is too big of a job and I don't have time.
Yes.
And so this takes it away. So what happens is people sign up for it, and then they get unlimited 15-minute calls. And in each call, we're dealing with something where they're wanting to explore. One day it might be how to clear the clutter off the kitchen counter. And the next day it might be, I don't really like my job, but I don't know what to do. Or it could be anything. But in each 15 minutes, it ends with something specific they can do. And then when they've done that, they schedule another 15-minute call. And it is so much fun because you can do it when you're waiting for the kids at soccer, or you're sitting waiting to go into the doctor's appointment, or wherever. And then you've got something specific. And research shows that we're 67% more likely to be successful with a job if we have an accountability partner. And so I end up being your accountability partner. But I also have, after 40 years in business, so many resources and connections. Sometimes it's connecting with you with someone that has an answer that I don't have an answer to. So you can go to barbarahemphill.com and see about the Vision Accelerator service. And I would be delighted and honored to help anyone.
And it's called the Vision Accelerator service. And this is laser coaching. You and I actually talked about that, and then I forgot. So thank you very much for making sure to mention that.
No problem.
Go check that out, and check out her books and her activities. It's just exciting to connect with you, and I'm excited about what you're doing. I think this is great. And I believe we're all learning how to package things into these smaller chunks, and we sneak them in. It's not like we're putting in a bunch of big rocks anymore. We're now sliding in the things that we can do, that we can control in little bits of time. And we get to continue to pursue what it is we're pursuing, but we get better at it as we go, 15 minutes at a shot.
Exactly. And Follower of One does a very good job of that too, giving people a way to move forward in small increments. I think sometimes we underestimate the value of incremental change.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think I need to double check where this quote came from, but we underestimate our impact in the long run, and we overestimate our impact in the short run. We think we can make a bigger difference in the short run, and we can't, but we can actually make a bigger difference in the long run, and we never think about that.
Well, there's a corollary to that, which I always tell people about procrastination. I talk a lot about procrastination because it's something we all struggle with. The things that we like to do take longer than we think they do. And the things that we don't like to do take less time than we think they do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, thank you again. Thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure, Mike, and best wishes with Follower of One. It's a wonderful program, and I'm so honored to know about it.
Thank you very much. And listeners, take a minute right now. Go check out barbarahemphill.com. Tell a friend about this podcast. And thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Follower of One podcast. Thank you very much. Follower of One is an online community of people who intentionally follow Jesus every day, at work or wherever we are. Join us at community.followerofone.org, and don't forget to subscribe and share it in your various social media channels. Thanks for listening.